BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission that I have embarked on with a bunch of other intrepid booktubers, in which we're reading Star Trek books. For the rest of the year, we're reading Star Trek books. We're categorizing them franchise by franchise. So for August, we're reading the original Star Trek, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Whether it's the first 3 seasons, or the animated show, or any of the novels that have sprawled out since then, or the movies. Anything set in the continuity of these original characters, that's what we're doing for August. Then in September, we'll do the next generation. I have a feeling some of my co-hosts and I will lock horns. But for now, Star Trek, the original series, is my Star Trek. That's the series that I fell in love with, and the series that I prayed for years would somehow come back. Somehow stop being in endless chopped up reprints on black and white TV and make an appearance, somehow come back on TV, be a movie. In my wildest dreams during those desert years, I had no idea how popular this would be, how much of a franchise Star Trek would come to be. That lay in the future. But I've decided for BookTrek 2021 for August that I have a lot of favorite Star Trek, original Star Trek novels, books that I've gone to back to over the years many times. I decided to stay away from those and instead revisit a lot of Star Trek that I haven't revisited much or at all. I read all these things when they came out for years, or decades. I eagerly snapped up any Star Trek fiction that came out. So I've read all these things, but I'm revisiting a lot of them for BookTrek 2021. And I will leave a link to my co-host channels down below. I don't know how many videos they're going to make. I'm going to make a lot. The number of videos might go down when I start talking about Star Trek The Next Generation. And it might stay down when I talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It is bound to blossom again with Star Trek Voyager. And I have a lot to say about Star Trek Enterprise too. But for Star Trek the original series, there are a huge number of books. And as I discussed in an earlier video, there was a huge amount of writing about the original series before there were any books. And certainly before pocket books officially designated the run here and allowed this to be authorized fiction. There was a huge amount of Star Trek fiction before then, and I like a lot of it. But I'm not going to talk about any of it, because a lot of it is inappropriate. A lot of it is not good. And that's not to say that once you become authorized by a movie studio, you're automatically good, but at least you'll be consistent. Usually. At least your characters will be in character. They won't suddenly say something you've never heard of before. That can be bothersome to a fan, right? Part of the reason why you read was essentially fan fiction is that kind of continuity. You want stories that are set firmly inside the continuity that you love so much that you've come to know it, that you are familiar with it. That can be a trick with Star Trek, because a lot of times if you're going to make a story set firmly in continuity like that, it will feel like you don't have any dramatic choices left. No freedom for where your story can go. If, for instance, you read a novel, as I'm going to show you right now. I read a novel for today. Last night I reread a Star Trek novel that's set firmly in ordinary show continuity. In other words, the USS Enterprise NCC 1701, the original 5-year mission. You know a whole bunch about this book before you read a single word. You know that all the characters survive because you've seen them in old age. You know the Enterprise survives. You know the Federation survives. You know a lot. There are a lot of dramatic stakes here that are removed. You know that the characters aren't going to be maimed. They probably aren't going to experience any kind of life-defining grief. All of that is in the book Bible. It's in the series Bible, and the authors by this point can't change that Bible. They have to write a story with that Bible unchanged, with that Bible in mind. Kind of a straitjacket. There is good work that can be done. And the book that I'm reading today, that I want to talk about today, is a near perfect example of how you can do that. This is a Star Trek novel number 77, Twilight's End, by Jerry Oltion, not Olton, there's an I in there. And this is firmly set in continuity. This is long after all of the seedy elements of Star Trek fan fiction that we talked about a couple of days ago had been strained out by the lawyers. So that none of that stuff happens anymore. This is an Enterprise mission. The Enterprise is sent to a planet that has a massive engineering project underway. Sent there in part because they're a starship, one of only a tiny handful of ships in the Federation that are a fully fledged, fully functional starship, able to handle anything. Massive science labs, massive weaponry, massive expertise on the part of the crew. In this case, specifically, the Enterprise's chief engineer, Montgomery Scott, who is, even in this early part in the show's continuity, known for his expertise with warp and impulse engines. And that turns out to be very important for this book, because the planet they go to in this novel is tidally locked in a binary star system. There are a bunch of other planets in the system, but this planet has, in other words, tidally locked, meaning one face is constantly facing one of its suns, and the other face is constantly facing the other and dimmer of its suns, meaning that one side of the planet is perpetually boiling hot, far too hot for human habitation, and the other side is far too cold. And there is a band. In between those two zones, there is a band where human life is possible, where agriculture of a kind is possible, that has its own native life forms and can have terraformed life forms, that sort of thing. There's a human civilization that has actually developed in that band. But the chemical processes of the light side of this planet are eventually destroying oxygen. Sooner or later, that band of habitability in between those two murderous zones is going to get smaller and smaller and then disappear. And the human inhabitants of this planet know that. They are friendly with the Federation. They are not members of the Federation, but they know about the Federation. There's no prime directive violations here. Kirk and his crew are sent there, especially Scotty, to help with a massive project that they have developed. Thousands of impulse engines implanted along the surface of the planet, designed to push it into so that it is not tidally locked anymore, in order to increase the habitable zone of the surface beyond that narrow band, which has been, we are told, we learn quickly in the course of this book, that narrow band has been exhausted. It's entirely full of people who don't want to live in underground shelters, but who are running out of resources, and they're running out of time. And there's a massive engineering project to use impulse engines to literally move this world in order to make it more habitable. And there are a group of people on board on this world, denialists, who don't want that to happen. They don't believe that it'll work. First of all, they think it will destroy the planet. I have to say, I'm no physicist, but the more I thought about it as I was reading this, the more I thought there's no chance this would work. It would simply rip the planet apart. Even Star Trek technology, which borders on the magical, still has limitations. But one way or another, the main scientist involved in this project has been kidnapped by these denialists who don't want the project to continue. And the planetary government that Kirk and crew meet when they get there is constitutionally divided. There is a minority representation, and the minority representation doesn't want this project to continue. They don't want the Federation's help in making it happen. That makes for a very tense brew that Kirk and crew enter into. I don't know why. Actually, I do. On one level, I know why the cover looks like this. But Scotty should be the second person on this cover. In addition to Jim Kirk and the Enterprise, it should be Scotty on this cover. It's a very large part of Scotty's novel. And the Enterprise encounters all sorts of difficulties with the technology of those impulse engines, and also with the politics of the planet. And there's a larger MacGuffin that rears its head at the halfway point of the novel that involves the other planets in the system, and maybe why this system is the way it is. It ends up being very, very good. I didn't need to be told that Jerry Oltion, I didn't need to be told before I learned that he has some science background. I didn't need to be told that because he's really good at it. This is clearly not, it's neither written by a total amateur who doesn't have any idea what he's talking about, nor is it written by a wonk who doesn't care about the drama of the story. Instead, all of those elements are done really well. There are no mischaracterizations anywhere in here. Kirk is especially well drawn. This is the second novel in a row where Kirk is well drawn. Very happy about that. Picked it at random, so I'm very happy about that. The drawback of the book you will be able to sense right away from my summary. It's a very brief summary, but even so, you'll be able to tell right away the drawback of the book. And unfortunately, it is true. The author does as much as he can to combat it, but this is a technological problem novel. In large part, it's a technological problem novel, so you have to be interested in that. And right away, at the beginning of the book, the author tells us that Mr. Spock himself is not all that interested in that subject. He's interested instead in why would a group of people conceive of such an incredible engineering feat, and also why would there be a group of people who want to stop them from doing that. And to the author's credit, he gives us that human side, human here in quotes because these are aliens that we're talking about, but he gives us that personal side in quite a bit of this book. But nevertheless, the MacGuffin at the heart of it is a technological problem. Scotty and the impulse engines. The thing could almost have been called that. And that immediately creates a limit in how much a lot of readers will be interested in this book. And I don't know any way around that, right? Surely, actually, a part of me was wondering whether or not the Enterprise would have been summoned here at all. There's no enemy activity. A scientist has been captured, but that's a diplomatic thing and also an internal thing. Otherwise, it's an engineering problem, and you would think maybe the Starfleet Corps of Engineers would be called in, or even a private company. There were parts, especially in the first 50 pages of this book, where I wondered why the Enterprise is being involved at all. But even so, even once you do involve it, it's still mainly going to be a technical problem, and it ends up being. I mean, there are elements that come to fore in the second half of the book that aren't technical. There's a drama involved here that will keep you reading. Aside from, there's a limitation here. There are two limitations of the book. One is that one character is given a sort of forced spotlight. There's a lot of emphasis put on Scotty in this book, even though Spock and Kirk both have, and McCoy, there's a surprising amount of McCoy. It's largely Scotty's novel. That's one limitation. The other limitation is that it's a technological problem, and that limits the broad-scale scope of the drama. But even so, despite those two limitations, and despite the fact that you can definitely tell when you're reading this book that corporate rule book is firmly in place here. You can definitely tell that. But it doesn't strangle. The limitations don't limit the book. I am not a fan of single character novels, and I'm not obviously equipped to understand the technology that the author understands better than I do. I love this book. Thought it was fantastic. A terrific read. I never wanted to put it down until it was done. And that shows you that the fact that corporate rule book can take a strong hold doesn't have to strangle the book. It doesn't have to be the end of enjoying the book. I've known a lot of long-term Star Trek fans who thought the more that book took control, the less enjoyable the novels were. And there's certainly cases where that's true. We'll get to some of those, but not in this case, and not yesterday. So Twilight's End, I very much enjoyed. The title refers to the fact that thanks to the balance of lighting on this world, the ambient light in that habitable band of this planet is always at roughly the twilight level. It never really goes up or down. Horrible storms, horrible instability, but the light level is relatively stable. And the progressive segment of the society in this world wants Twilight to end. They want it to end. They want it to be a big habitable world. And the last 20 pages will really make you smile. They really will. No matter what side of the question you come down on, one of the things I really enjoyed about this novel is that the opposition to that, obviously Federation Star Trek style plan, bring more light to the world, literally. The opposition to that plan is they're not portrayed as knee-jerk denialists, despite that being their name. Their stance is actually well fleshed out. You actually believe that someone could believe it without being a villain. So I very much enjoyed it, and that will continue. I'm not 100% sure that I will make videos every single day for BookTrek 2021. I don't want to bury you in content, but I am loving going back to these Star Trek novels. I have a vast library of them, and on the iPad mini they are proving to be very enjoyable to read. I've already gone on to the next one, so you will probably get a Star Trek video tomorrow as well. But I'll probably give you some vacations. The weekends maybe we'll take off from Star Trek. But one way or another, I'm going to wrap this up. That is BookTrek 2021. I will leave the hashtag. I have to constantly be reminded to leave the hashtag. The reason for that is so that you can find all of these videos. Mark Richardson at Richardson Reads has made one extra video. I don't think any of the other hosts have weighed in so far this month, but they will. And it'll be the hashtag that you find them. But I'll leave links down below to anything that's relevant. And I will see you tomorrow as our journey continues. Thank you, BookTube.